So Simba, thank you for joining us on BomaChats today. It's wonderful to have you in our Boma. We're super excited to learn more about what it is you're doing and to catch up. Just wondering if you might be able to tell us, since I last saw you at London Business School, what have you been up to?
Sure. Thanks, Jeb and Michaela. It's a pleasure to be here on Boma series. Um, since I was at London Business School, I was fortunate enough to join a financial institution called CBZ Holdings. It's the largest bank in Zimbabwe. It's a holding company which has several different businesses units, including the largest bank in Zimbabwe, also the largest ag financing unit in Zimbabwe, the second largest asset manager in CBZ Asset Management, and then we also have CBZ Properties and other various divisions, including CBZ Capital, which is sort of the proprietary investing arm of the entity. So I actually came in and joined CBZ Capital as a managing partner, and part of our job there was to look at both internal units and external units to see how they're performing, and we saw that we could enhance the return profile to shareholders if we focused heavily on what then was our largest unit in terms of lending, which is CBZ AgroYield, whereby we are offering credit to the agriculture value chain. So I joined that, and suffice to say, 2 years later, we have probably enhanced the return profile fourfold in 2 years, which is very difficult to do in agriculture. It's extremely difficult. It's very complex. But we've achieved our targets. The nation, Zimbabwe, as you know, we were once the breadbasket of Africa and went through a very tough 20-year period. And suffice to say, in the last 2 years, number one, we've managed to hit record numbers in wheat production, whereby for the first time ever, we're actually able to produce more wheat than we consume. And this year, and that's largely to do with AgroYield, which is the largest financing entity in that sector. But we finance several crops, and that's just one of the many positives that have come out from our interventions. Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what are you doing and what is this fund looking to do, CBZ AgroYield?
At CBZ AgroYield, we are a provider of credit to the agriculture value chain as a whole, in its totality. And that's a lot in one word. But we are providing credit to farmers. We're providing credit to fertilizer companies, seed companies, fuel companies, chemical companies that are all part of the agriculture value chain. We are looking at irrigation providers, the power industry, logistics industry. All those form a critical part of the agriculture value chain. But it's broader than that. We're trying to solve a problem and solve a proverbial problem that we're all aware of. Africa has been a net importer of food for as long as we as long as we know. In 2008, we're importing $15 billion worth of food into Africa. In 2022, that number is 55 billion, and by 2030, it's going to be 110 billion. Right?
Wow.
And we're largely financing that through funds coming in from our export of natural resources, mainly metals and mining and oil and that sort of thing. And that equation is not sustainable in the long run because of the obvious global disruptions we've seen in the food commodity supply chain in recent times. We're having more frequency in these tail events, whether it be the war in Ukraine, whether it be COVID, and all these other aspects that are disrupting our supply chain. And what's interesting is that is increasing the cost of food. And so the food and price inflation for Africa is highest in the world. Food prices have gone up more than 40% in the last couple of years, and we are least able to afford that as Africa. Now we have over 150 million people that are exposed to a food crisis. So that's what we're trying to solve for by localizing and fortifying the local food supply chains and food systems. That's
Simba,
really what we're
can I
trying
ask
to
a
solve
question about the increasing net importing that you just cited from 2008 until now, and then that huge number for 2030? Is a lot of that because of poor market structure or disorienting market structures? Like I've heard anecdotes about how the U.S. Farmers have been really good at selling grain, subsidized grain paid for by the U.S. government, and kind of dumping it onto into certain African markets. And what that does is it creates an artificially low price for the U.S. grains and cereal crops, making it non-competitive for local farmers in jurisdictions like Zimbabwe or Uganda to grow and create a commercial enterprise out of their yields. Is that true, or am I misinformed about that?
No, not that you're misinformed. I think when you look at agriculture in general, there are so many aspects that go into producing a ton of maize. And I'm just going to give you an example of here in Zimbabwe. And you can take this example across Africa. Number one, you've got to have the land. The land has to be fertile enough, right? If it's not fertile enough, you have to optimize by fortifying the land with fertilizers and so forth. Okay. Another issue is that you need the seed, you need chemicals, you need fuels, you need labor, you need water, right? And in Africa, where most of our production is rain-fed, okay, which means the rain can come in unequal distributions that are not optimal for that particular seed, right? So your seed varieties have to be optimized for that particular piece of land because of the variations in water or in the rain. That's if you don't have irrigation, okay? And irrigation is a whole different step because now you're talking about how do we dam that water? How do we fortify ourselves against climate change issues by damming the water? But now once you're damming the water, you're looking at 30-year infrastructure investment because that's really how long you're going to amortize the cost of a dam over. And these dams can run into the billions of dollars, the millions of dollars, right? Then you're looking at water conveyance, right? How do you actually get the water from the dam to the farmers? You're looking at canals, you're looking at pipes, you're looking at PVC pipes. So that's an oil industry issue because you're making the plastic for that from the oil industry. You're looking at the management of water rights, right? Somebody has to finance that. And African governments can't solely finance that by themselves. So now you need the private sector. But the private sector needs to be certain that that piece of land is fungible and collateralizable for the next 30 or 40 or 100 years. Because you have to amortize your investment over that long. So you can see the complexity. Then we're getting into the capital market structure of Africa. Do we have enough depth in capital markets? Do we have the legal framework to do that? So all that adds to the cost of producing a ton of wheat. The US and all these other countries have a robust policy framework that governs that aspect of things. In Africa, we simply don't have that. Okay. Now we haven't even gone into the road and rail system to bring about the fertilizers and the chemicals in order to fortify the land. All the chemicals and fertilizers are coming from China, coming from Morocco, coming from the Balkans. So it becomes more complex. For us to get into the fertilizer industry, you need power, you need it's mining, it's huge capex investment.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's then just easier to get a ton of wheat at $450 a ton landed in Zimbabwe today from the Gulf of Mexico than it is to invest in all this infrastructure in order to begin producing from the local environment.
Okay.
Yeah. So that equation will probably take an entire thesis for us to really try and solve.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, given the complexities that you've described, it sounds pretty challenging, and we know just operating has its challenges. What keeps you going, and why are you doing this? Why is it still important?
If not us, then who? Looking at the numbers that we're talking about, does the rest of the world genuinely have an incentive for us to increase our food production and feed ourselves when we are going to be spending $110 billion by 2030? This money is going to be going to some farmer somewhere who's in a political constituency that is key. This could be the farmers in the Balkans. Can you imagine that you're in the Balkans at the moment, you're saying you are producing a ton of wheat that you know is going to get to Burundi. It's going to get to Zimbabwe, right? They've probably never even been here. But that farmer is capacitated on the backdrop of what we are not doing locally. Okay. So we have to, the planning has to begin somewhere. The actions have to begin somewhere. On our side here in Zimbabwe, we were once the breadbasket of Africa. That tag was taken away due to a slew of issues, including our internal land reform in 2000 and so forth, because it was an unsustainable structure of agriculture for Zimbabwe, given our history. All issues are very localized. But fast forward to the last few years, you've seen us produce over 300,000 tons of wheat, more than we actually require locally. Right. And a large part of that has been financed by AgroYield. Right. If AgroYield were a country, just my division alone, we would be in the top 10 in Africa in wheat production. Right?
Wow.
Just my division. So I'm not even talking about maize production, soya production, and the slew of other crops that we finance. And so the question becomes, well, why do we do that? Because we have to localize food systems. During COVID, you could not get fertilizer into the country or maize into the country. Why? Because the ports were closed because of COVID. All right. There were not enough ships around. Okay. The cost of sea freight increased, exponentially. Right. And now, as we speak, we have 150 million people that are exposed to starvation in Africa simply because of the war in Ukraine and a slew of other issues. Right. So that is why we are here. We've got the land. It exists. It is there. The capital exists somewhere, whether it be with the African diaspora, with global institutional money managers, whether it be in Africa itself. But matching that capital to the opportunity on the ground and extracting that value is going to take people that are smarter than myself. So it is my job to bring those people together to allow for that. And we are already seeing with the results on the ground that this is very possible.
Got it. And Simba, how is AgroYields achieving the success that you're achieving? How are you going about it? What's your strategy been to get the results?
Sure. AgroYield is involved in, as I said, in the financing of the entire value chain. So you can't look at agriculture and say, I'm only going to finance a farmer or an irrigation provider. You have to look at the entire value chain. Right? Because as I mentioned, for that ton of wheat to come out, there is an entire chain of things that have to work for that to happen. And so even when you look at a particular farmer, right, you can't say, well, I'm financing a small scale farmer and I'm leaving out the large scale farmer, because all of them are part of this equation. Right. Over the last 20 years, billions of dollars have come in and gone into scaling up smallholder farmers in Africa in terms of improving their yields and a whole host of other issues. But I'm just going to give you a scenario of how we do it. So we, for example, will finance, let's start with the farmer. We'll finance their inputs, right, through input financing schemes. And we've got bespoke technology that is specific to Zimbabwe and its unique attributes that allows a farmer to go online, submit their application, go through the land verification process. We then go through our due diligence process, coupled with our extension officers who overlay that due diligence. And then we approve a farmer for a package, whether it be for 5 hectares or 1,000 hectares or 5,000 hectares, depending on the application and the DD that we've done. We then allow that farmer to redeem those inputs via their mobile phone. So they will go to their local area supplier. So they don't need to travel 300 kilometers, because that is part of the problem in Africa, getting inputs as close to the farmer as possible so that there are no other logistics costs that they have to incur in order to get that seed, the basil, the compound D, the chemicals, the fuel, the tillage services in order to begin production. And we've got a satellite monitoring system that then says, well, you've redeemed 10 hectares worth of seed, all right? But we only see land prep for 5 hectares. So as you begin to redeem your fuel or your basil or your fertilizer or your top or whatever it is, it limits it to what you've done on the ground. Okay. So we are already mitigating our risk from the onset. We will then only give you the fuel based on the tillage that we see on the ground. We then monitor using NDVI and a slew of other satellite technology aspects, what your implied hectarage is, all right? And we then have extension services who then can advise you on what to do.
Wow.
All right. And we've seen this work for us. Now, you can produce a ton of wheat or maize or corn, but if you don't have a market for it, it's as good as useless, because a lot of these farmers don't have the silos or the storage capacity on their farms to then store 40,000 tons of wheat or maize. Right. So we then connect you to the closest off-taker. All right. And that is very complex, because in Africa, you normally have these national grain buying firms or parastatals, and they usually have a preset pre-planting price, which then guarantees your floor price for your particular product. Okay. So if you fail to sell your product to other off-takers, you can always send it and take it there. All right. And that's an important aspect. It's like a put option. All right. It ensures that at least I can take my grain somewhere. There's always that floor price. Okay?
Yeah.
So we organize all that infrastructure for you as a farmer so that you focus on farming. Now, I could go into the fertilizer companies. The fertilizer companies are importing, so they need letters of credit. So we need to sort that out. Right? I can go to the irrigation companies who are doing your pivots, who are doing your drip irrigation or other aspects of irrigation, your irrigation pumps, your main lines, your PVC lines, your transformers, because you need power. In some aspects, you need solar overlaying with your power from the grid, because the grid is not that reliable. All those aspects need to be financed. The logistics companies are massive. That's massive. Ensuring the availability of fuel en masse for the planting time, because when you're planting, that's when the country actually needs to absorb a lot of fuel in terms of diesel and petrol for land prep. So that has to be there. So I could probably go into all the other aspects of the ag value chain, but we finance all those aspects in order to ensure that that ton of maize is there, and that farmer is paid and is able to redeploy the capital into the following season. Because in Zimbabwe, we have 2 seasons. So in 1 year, a farmer is able to do maize and then do wheat, or do soya and then do wheat. That's a very important part of the equation.
Gotcha. So then I'm going to let Michelle ask the next question, but just a quick one. So you are involved at every single part of the value chain, pretty much. Your company is it's not just financing farmers. It is actually making sure that the farmers have access to the ecosystem that will enable their success and enable them to pay back the loans or the capital that your organization is providing. Is that a correct assessment?
That is a correct assessment. We've had phenomenal improvements in the last 18 to 24 months in terms of the improvement of our recovery rates. So to the extent that it's now, we pretty much now have a revolving fund where we're able to redeploy a lot of that capital into the subsequent seasons. But that all comes down to loan structuring. Loan origination is a key aspect of this, and then monitoring of that loan through its life cycle. As you can allude to, Africa has got unique flora and fauna regions. Just as Zimbabwe alone has got 5 flora and fauna regions. So the loan structure of somebody sitting in Mutare in the east of the country is very different to the loan structure that you need to have for someone sitting in the south of the country, sitting in the south of the country. The duration, the type of seed, the type of chemicals, the genetics of that seed, all these aspects are different. So having bespoke solutions, for these regions has allowed us to optimize our loan performance to where this is a profitable enterprise.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, super impressive and really exciting. So, Simba, you've painted a really exciting, vision and why you're doing this. Tell us a little bit around what does success look like. So when you've seen CBZ really succeed and having the impact, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's multifaceted. The key aspect is number one, are we increasing the yields and are we increasing food production? Is our import bill coming down as a nation? And that is happening for the row crops. All right. So there is success there, and that is critical success. Are we able to ensure that there is food in all areas of the country? And is the Zimbabwean population able to feed itself? I think that's very, very important. And it's incremental growth over a long period of time. That's very important. Equally as important is, well, are we able to finance this sustainably from local resources? All right. So anyone can throw money at a problem, but if you're not able to repeat that success in subsequent years and finance it sustainably, then there's a problem. There's always going to be a gap, all right, and it leads to some macroeconomic issues. So we are trying to optimize that program, that issue to say, well, let's finance this, sustainably. Let's ensure that farmers are repaying back their loans. Let's ensure that production is occurring optimally. And we are going towards food self-sufficiency. And not only food self-sufficiency, we should be exporting to the rest of Africa. We do not need to be getting our wheat, from Australia, from the Balkans, from North America, and from South America. All this wheat can be produced on the continent with enough planning and enough resources thrown to the problem. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So that's what success looks like to me, and everyone has got to be part of this equation. It's not just the large scale farmer or the small scale farmer. Everyone across the board. It's easy to throw money at someone who's got some marginal success, and I'll give you an example. If you're a corn farmer and you're producing 5 tons of wheat, 5 tons of corn per hectare, that's okay. It's not bad because the average yields are less than a hectare, or less than 1 ton in Africa, right? So I would rather, I could easily throw resources at that commercial farmer and get that commercial farmer from 5 tons a hectare to 10 tons a hectare. That's doubling his or her production, right? But we're saying let's look at the small scale farmer who's also only averaging 1 ton per hectare. Right. Let's also increase that to 2 tons per hectare. Just those interventions alone are also extremely important. So that to us is extremely important, just as important as all the other things that we're doing. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. And Simba, what are some of the biggest barriers that you can foresee that might disallow you from ultimately realizing your vision of success?
Yeah, there are plenty. Agriculture is capital intensive. It is capital intensive. It is. We've got farmers that are that are running a $10 million balance sheet on a farm. We've also got farmers that are running a $10,000 balance sheet on their farm annually. So you can see, and we've got 37,000 farmers on our books. That's a lot of farmers. That's a lot of farmers to manage. So technology played a phenomenal. We've digitized the entire platform. It's quite phenomenal, actually, all the way through from loan origination or all the way through to the offtake and selling of the particular product. So the massive, access to right quantums and right tenured capital is key. As I said, if we're going to optimize for irrigation is very, very important because of climate change issues. So we're trying to fortify ourselves against climate change. But if you're going to build a dam and you need $10 million or $20 million, you need to amortize that over 30 years. Where are you going to get 30-year money at a sustainable cost of capital in order to do that? All right. That's from institutional funds, all right? Your pension funds, both local and international, right? But what is sort of the capital market infrastructure around that to optimize or to allow that capital to be deployed into agriculture? Do we have vehicles and instruments that can give the investors confidence and the asset manager confidence? That's a whole different equation that we have. So that matching, I think, is most critical. How do we match from the sources of capital? And we know there's a need, and these sources of capital are global, and they need yield, they need alpha. But are the conditions conducive enough on a macro and micro scale for us to be able to deploy it? All right. and that goes into policy issues that are vast in nature. So I feel that that's where the real issues are. The skill sets are there. The access to knowledge is there. All these infrastructure needs need an optimal source of capital for us to be able to make it work. And so that's part of my job is to speak to policymakers so that we can have an understanding of what it truly takes to get us to that next level in terms of food production. Yeah.
There's so much focus and there's so much development capital available for smallholder farmers. But in order to actually lower that net import bill, there needs to be some more focus on your medium-sized or larger scale farming enterprises. And I feel like that probably deserves like a whole episode to discuss that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But you did a good job today of kind of keeping it very high level, and then we can hopefully kind of dig into more details in subsequent discussions. Simba, I think that's all from our side today. Thank you for being our first guest on BomaChats.